Hey there, it's Andrea, and welcome to the Voice of Influence podcast. Today I have with me Joe Byerly. Joe is a combat arms officer with over 20 years of experience in combat and training environments and has served from the tactical to the strategic level. He is the founder of thegreennotebook.com, host of From the Green Notebook podcast, and co-author of My Green Notebook, Know Thyself Before Changing Jobs. Joe, welcome to the podcast, Voice of Influence podcast.
Well, thanks for having me today, Andrea. Look forward to the conversation.
Yeah, so I think it's only fair to start by asking, what is this green notebook that you speak of?
Yeah, so I actually brought like the first one that I actually started writing down my thoughts in. So these are government issue notebooks that anybody in the U.S. military, regardless of branch of service, we get them in our supply rooms, and so they're typically used to take meeting notes, jot down your to-do list, whatever. And so, from the start of my time in the military, I was issued one of these, and I've collected a mass of them ever since. And it expanded from to-do list, after action reviews, the things that we do after a training event to gather our lessons learned, and my to-do list to actually reflecting on the day, reflecting on life, and growing as a leader. So it's grown from a small notebook to a blog, a podcast, and newsletters, and my daily reflection tool.
Okay, that's great. I love that. So how many do you think you've written in over the years?
So
Have you
I've
ever
probably
counted?
written. No, I've never counted, and a lot of it, like, we lose them. So the fact that I still have this one is pretty good. But now I use a 3x5 moleskin notebook that I carry around in my back pocket and can quickly write in and then throw it back down. It's a little bit harder to do that with one of those notebooks and a pair of jeans.
I can see that. Yeah, I love journaling, and one of the things that I've said before is that if we ever had a fire in our house, what would, people ask, what would you take besides your living beings in your home? It would definitely be my journals.
Can I ask you a question about that?
Oh,
I know
sure.
I'm your guest. So when you journal, is it do you have like a set format that you go with? Are there like certain things that you make sure you catch in it, or is it just kind of whatever you're feeling in that moment?
It is me processing my life and my world, I think, more than anything.
Okay.
It's not necessarily, sometimes it's this is what happened and this is why I'm like struggling with it. I'm not really sure what to do with it, or, like I'll process it in that kind of way by writing it out. How about
Yeah,
you?
it's
What do you do?
I do the same. I pretty much do the same thing. There's a couple of things that I catch every day. One is I wear a Fitbit, so I'm always looking at how many minutes my heart rate was in the zone, how many steps, and how many calories I burned, just to kind of see it week by week. And then I wear a Whoop bracelet. I'm not sure if you're familiar with those, but they track your heart rate and your sleep. Because that was something I struggled with for a while, was getting decent sleep.
Hmm.
And so I write that in there first thing every day. And then if there's something that I'm working on, so let's say like I need to cut back on drinking, I'll
Hmm.
actually write how many drinks I had that day as well,
Hmm.
just so I can just keep myself honest if it's something I'm trying to cut back on.
Sure. So it's like your own little source of accountability too.
It is absolutely.
Mm. Yeah, that's interesting. How did this become a thing for you? Because obviously it meant something significant to you to want to do more with it.
Yeah, so I was working on a project when I was a captain in 2013, for my boss. My boss at the time was a guy named Major General H.R. McMaster, who went on to become a national security advisor a couple years later. And we were trying to build a website together uh, on the Department of Defense servers, that people could go to, share ideas, find book recommendations, basically develop themselves throughout their Army career. And I found out that trying to create a website, and at that time, trying to create a website in the Army was about the same as trying to buy a brand new tank. It was we dealt with so much bureaucracy that by the time we got it to launch, it wasn't what I wanted at all. Like I think at the time, like the platform Blackboard was on like 9.0 and we had like point 0.5, version point 0.5. So it was just super clunky. So shortly after that, I was like, I could probably do something like this on my own
Hmm.
and make it look a lot better. So shortly after that, I started my website. And at first, it was just my blog. And I was so scared to actually put my ideas out there that it was anonymous. And it was just leadership lessons and random musings. And then I started putting my name on it. And then friends started asking me if they could post their short little 400, 700 word piece on it. And then people I didn't even know started emailing me. And then I would reach out to people and ask them if they could help me out. So now we have a team of about 20 people that volunteer in various aspects of the website. We publish about 3 articles a week from military leaders of all ranks, of all services. And I think to date, I've had like 4.4 million views on the website. So it's definitely become a major leader development tool in the military, but there was no strategy, there was no vision. It was just something I was doing every day that gained momentum after a few years.
Oh, yeah, that's really cool. So, when you were first starting and you were really nervous about putting your name to your pieces, can you talk to me a little bit about like what do you think that fear was and how did you get over it?
Yeah, I think for me, I'm a combat arms officer, so we're really good at kicking down doors, shooting tanks, doing very very fast-paced kinetic activity, not writing a 400, 700 word thought piece. And so I was really nervous about that because it was different. My friends weren't doing it.
Mm,
My coworkers weren't doing it. So it was something new, in my peer group. So that there was a little bit of that. And then there was also some imposter syndrome going on there. Who am I to actually talk about this topic? And so there's a lot of working through that over time. And I told you it started out anonymous, and I started seeing posts go viral, and I was getting jealous that this anonymous author was going viral, and I couldn't tell anybody that it was me. And I had a good group of friends at the time, that I started telling this is what I'm doing, and who encouraged me to finally put my name to the pieces. And then now, there's a little bit of fear when I publish. I don't want to. I
mm,
want it to make sense. I want it to, have accurate grammar, but it's
mm,
it's nowhere near what it was
mm.
10 years ago.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's hard to put yourself out there and to actually share an opinion or share an idea because I think especially at first they feel very personal when you first start doing it and it feels a little bit like, oh, I don't know, at least that was my experience was it might feel like rejection of me, not just my idea.
Oh, exactly. And the one thing that really helped me was that I looked at it not as me trying to tell somebody what to do or how to do it, but all
Mm,
I was doing was starting a conversation
mm,
about the topic I was writing about. And so if I could write about something and people were talking about it at work the next day and discussing the merits of it, then that was a win for me.
yeah. You had a lot of training too, right? Why don't you just tell me about what your military leadership training was like?
It was a lot of on the job. We when I
Mm,
first came in, we'd go to these short schools, a couple of months long, mostly focused on learning tactics and taking tests. But
mm,
I think I was, 23, 24, and all of a sudden I'm in charge of a group of people. And then it was mostly on the job training. I was very fortunate. I got to lead a platoon of about 20 people during the surge in Iraq
mm,
for 15 months overseas. I did it again in Mosul as a commander of about 80 people.
mm.
And then, over time, that number increased, eventually 250. And now I'm in charge of an organization of 500. So a lot of on the job training, but that training had to get supplemented with something. And that's where for me, reading and writing have been, and reflection have been huge compliments to my own job training, and
Mm,
not only help me make sense of the experience I was going through, but also prepare me for future positions of responsibility. Like coming into this job 2 years ago, I felt so prepared. And I think it was because I had spent the last decade reading, writing, and reflecting a lot in my free time.
sure. So when you were first kind of charting your own path in terms of your leadership journey, your leadership growth, and looking for books or trying to figure out what to read, were you choosing those based on recommendations or based on interest? And so you just kind of search for things, or how did you come up with your own little curriculum?
Yeah, so at first like people would recommend books and then I'd be reading them. Somebody would walk into the office and see me reading a book, ask me about it, and they say, "Oh, you should read that." And then I would write that down. And then eventually, about 10 years ago, and this, I was reading very sporadically when I was a junior officer. And it wasn't until I worked for HR McMaster that I was like, man, this is something I need to be doing more of. And so I went from about 4 to 5 books a year to now it's between 40 and 50 uh, books a year. And a lot of it's like I'll read something and then I'll go into the footnotes or the end notes and like, oh man, like that was interesting. Let me dive deeper into that. Or I will come across an antidote in a book and be like, that was really cool. And then I'll read a whole book
Mm.
about that one vignette that they talked about. So it's a lot of rabbit holes,
Yeah.
Andrea, and my like interest is really like all over the place.
Yeah, yeah. You just love to learn. So, what have you always loved to learn? And was that kind of a natural thing for you growing up? Or when did you really start to feel like this is, like it sort of clicked for you?
Yeah, so it wasn't like in college. I was more concerned with keg parties than I was studying for class, being social. And even when I got in the army, I thought my education was over. And I
Mm,
didn't realize that it's like it's on us to determine when our education is over, not when they hand you a diploma and say, see you later. I think it was, I had great mentors along the way who modeled that behavior. So I think that was part of it. But there was a book I read when I was a captain in 2013 that really brought things into perspective for me and showed me the importance of reading. And it's a quick story. It was a 1911 Arctic expedition. Two teams raced to the South Pole on foot. It was 1,800 miles round trip. One team was led by a British naval captain named Sir Robert Falcon Scott. The other team was led by a Norwegian named Roald Amundsen. And this book was called The Last Place on Earth by Roland Hunsford. And it details their journey and what led up to the journey. And what you find is that Sir Robert Falcon Scott, like he was just obsessed with the promotion. Like that's what he wanted to do. And so he was just like, Arctic exploration is the way for me to do that. And Amundsen was just passionate about polar exploration, period. And so every chance he got, he would go and get out in the snow, live in those conditions. And at the time when you would go on an expedition, you would keep a journal, you would write a book about it. So there was all these books of all these polar explorers that came before this particular expedition in 1911 who had written books. Amundsen read all of them. Scott didn't read any of them. So just setting the stage, the two teams that went to the South Pole, Admundson from Norway or Scott from UK? Which one do you think made it first?
I would assume Edmondson.
He did, and he made it by several weeks. So imagine being Scott's team, and you get there and you see, the Norwegian flag already flying at the South Pole when you just walked 900 miles to be the first ones there. But they had to go 900 miles back. And the way we know what happened to Scott's team is that they found their journals on their frozen bodies inside their tent. Amundsen brought all of his people home. And when you
Mm,
look at their two stories, and everything that happened on those expeditions, Admonson not only had his own experience, but he had the experience of all those explorers who came before him that he
Mm.
brought to bear, and he was able to anticipate challenges that were going to happen. He was able to see opportunities that nobody else could see, whereas Scott was relying on his experience, and that was it. And so reading that story just really, I don't know, just it like resonated with me. And I just come back from 2 combat deployments,
Yeah.
and I thought about how much of a better leader I could have been
Hmm.
if I would have dedicated a little bit more time to studying instead of drinking beer on the weekends. And so around that time is where that love of reading just it like took off. And so I went from, reading one book at a time to reading three, four, five. I've read like 7 books, at a time in some months. And so it's just been this awesome thing, and it's worked. Amazing things have happened in my military career, and I've had a ton of material to write about. And I've gotten to meet some of my favorite authors doing the podcast. So
Yeah.
it's worked out.
Oh yeah, that's a great story. What a great, like, I don't know, call to action. And yeah, it just feels like, I'm sure that especially as somebody who's a captain and leading people in the military, and you really could be in that position where you're needing to make sure to bring everybody home. And, I mean, I'm sure that's just it's a huge weight anyway. But I think, putting it into the perspective that you saw in that book is, it had to have really made an impact.
It has. And then, my current job where, I'm responsible for 500 people and their families. Like,
Hmm.
this is the first job I've ever come into where I felt completely prepared for it.
Hmm.
Because I had spent so many years studying prior to coming into it. And I think I've been able to, bring a lot of those lessons that I've read about, and, study the people, the leaders from history who I've admired. And I've been able to bring a lot of that to my current job.
Sure. Do you mind sharing what you're doing now?
Yeah. So I'm a squadron commander for 4th Squadron, 2nd Cavalry Regiment. Let's see, today is May 16th, and I have less than 30 days left before I leave this job and I retire from the Army. Um,
Wow.
but uh, but we work with our NATO allies, to train together to prepare the alliance, and
Hmm.
then to deter Russian aggression over here. So it's awesome work, and we've got some amazing people in our organization.
Oh, wow. Obviously that is a huge, huge job. And thank you for your service and for what you're doing to help protect everybody.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you for paying your taxes so that we
Yeah.
can.
Yeah. When you think about how much you're actually reading, and then how much are you able to really integrate and apply, do you think? Are you really, how does it synthesize for you, I guess, and turn into who you are?
Yeah, so I think one of the most important things, there's something called the forgetting curve. And I
Mm.
think it's like within um 48 hours after you've read something, you've forgotten about 95% of what
Mm.
you've read. So when I read, I'm an active reader. So I have my pen, I have a highlighter, and I'm highlighting in the book, I'm making margin notes. And then when I finish, I take my small notebook and I'll write down the passages, I'll write down quotes, I'll write down thoughts I had while I was reading in my notebook. And I'll come back to it maybe a week, 2 weeks, sometimes even months later, and move that stuff over. And because I carry it around with me all the time, I'm constantly looking at it. So it's not just I read a book, by Annie Duke, Thinking in Bets. I read a book by Annie Duke, Thinking in Bets, and then I copied everything that I thought was interesting down into a notebook, and I'm constantly looking at it. And so it almost like, starts putting indentions into my brain, these ideas. And then I'm able to actually bring some of those key concepts to work. And then The other thing was when you read a lot. Do you matter of fact, let me ask you, do you read a lot, Andrea?
I do. I read a lot, but I read a lot more in my early young adult years.
Yeah. So I think it's a lot of the same stuff over and over and over again. And so I think like one of the things I've noticed is that like there's, just a few key concepts that I keep seeing over and over again, or that have like at least stood out to me
Mm.
in all the different books I read. And those are the things that I really try to bring into work with me. So I think the important ones have definitely, that the ones that have resonated with me have found its way into my day job. And then,
Yeah.
some of the other ones have just made for great writing material.
Can you share any of those off the top of your head?
So in the late 90s, Disney Pixar had just come out with their first Toy Story, and they were working on A Bug's Life. And so the team that did Toy Story 1 is now working on A Bug's Life, and everybody is like focused on that. They've got another team doing Toy Story 2, and this team had been working on, I think, for like a year and a half. So it's like November, I can't remember what year, late 90s. It's November, A Bug's Life comes out, huge success. And they're like, okay, it's over with. Now um, let's go over and see how Toy Story 2. They watch it, terrible, absolutely horrible. They show it to the Disney executives. They're like, this is terrible. So Steve Jobs, John Lasseter, Ed Catmull, they all get together and they say, hey, like this movie's coming out in October of the next year. We've got to do something. So they bring the whole team together at Pixar and they say, we think we can have 2 years worth of work done in the next 6 months. Who's on board? Everyone's like, let's do it. So for the next 6 months, they worked 7 days a week. I think like 14, 18, 20-hour days. Animators are sleeping at the studios there at Pixar. And everybody's on board this mission. So June rolls around, they finish it, everybody high fives. Well, one morning, an animator, this is in California, is going to work, gets to work, calls home, calls his wife, talks to her, and she goes, "How did daycare drop off go today?" And he's like, "Oh my god!" And he goes running out to the parking lot, and his baby is still strapped into the car seat in the parking lot. And so, thankfully, their child was okay. But June in California, in a locked car is scary.
Mm.
But instead of it, blaming it on this particular animator's lack of, lack of awareness in that moment, Ed Catmull and the leadership at Pixar actually took a step back and reflected and realized that he came away with this one lesson, is that when you have people who are dedicated and they want to achieve and they want to do the right thing, and you got a group of managers who want to get results and nobody is regulating that, it creates a toxic culture
Mm.
where people are burning themselves out.
Mm.
And the event happened with the child left in the car seat. And so I read that and I was like, you're absolutely right. Like, if I'm pushing, everybody below me is pushing, and then the people under them are just, working, 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 then
Mm.
it's totally a toxic culture. So for the last 2 years, I've kind of looked at it as managing a rheostat. And so like if I think that we're kind of slacking on things, I'll adjust it and put a lot more pressure. If
Mm.
I think that people are pushing way too hard and need a break, I will dial it back. But I'm always watching that
Mm.
as a leader. So that's just one example
Yeah,
of
that's good.
something that I read that just really stuck with me, and I've tried to watch myself as a leader.
Mm. Do you have a leadership philosophy that you set forth?
No, I wrestled with that.
Okay, okay.
I wrestled coming into the organization. And, because that's what they teach us. You have to have a leadership philosophy. You have to have a well thought out vision. And I don't know, like I was like, I just need to get a feel for this organization first. When I got there,
Mm-hmm.
and I said, I'm going to set an example and I'm going to model behavior, and I just want to see if people follow my lead.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of what I did. And the thing that I came up with was that, war is very chaotic,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a lot of stuff going on. There's a lot of friction. And I said that we were going to be the credibility in the chaos.
Mm.
And so I was always trying to do things that would make us credible. Whether it was like physical fitness, whether it was, training on our core skill sets or maintaining our vehicles. So, um, that was something I focused on, but I recognized that, like, in order to get that, I had to invest in the people. So I
Yeah.
spent a lot of time doing one-on-one counseling, one-on-one coaching,
Mm.
working out in the mornings with small groups of people, talking about goal setting, why it's important. And I think over time, like, people felt the culture, even though they
Mm.
may not necessarily been able to articulate it.
Mm. So you didn't necessarily share with everybody that you wanted to be the credibility in the chaos, but
I
you
I said it, but I never
okay.
described like what that looked like.
Yeah,
And that was like the closest thing I had to
yeah,
a leadership vision, which I don't know. Like, maybe a year from now, I'll reflect on it some more to see if, like, that was the right thing to come in with.
well, it was a thing to come in with.
Yeah. Yeah,
Like,
that's a good
you
point.
know, like there are a lot of different things that we could do and say. And I think one of the most important things is just to have a perspective to come in with, to come in with something.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's what I did, and it's been an awesome experience.
Yeah. What is something that you've learned in the military that you might not have learned if you went down a different path?
I think the biggest thing, I don't know, I think there's a correlations to everything, but I think one of the biggest thing is just the role that friction plays. But I'm sure, like, Murphy's Law, like, plays out in everything.
Mm,
And so I think for me, that's been the one thing that I've always thought about in the military. And it showed its hands in, like, multiple wars across history. But is being able to anticipate friction, try to reduce it as much as we can. But then when it happens, to go ahead.
yeah, I was just going to ask you to why don't you expand on just a little bit on what is friction? Like what are you referring to?
Yeah, it'd be like if let's say I asked you, I was like, hey, Andrea, could you deliver this card 5 houses down? And you're like, yeah, that's easy. And in my mind, that's very easy. I'm just asking Andre to go 5 houses down and deliver this card. What could go wrong? But all of a sudden, right before you go to take the card 5 doors down, phone rings,
Mm,
and it's your mom. She's checking in. You have a conversation with her, and then all of a sudden you forget that the card, and then you realize, okay, yeah, let me go. I just remembered I got to do this thing. Then now it's like 2 hours after I thought you were going to go walk 5 doors down and deliver the card. Then you go do it. You're on your way down. You get 2 doors down. You see your neighbor. Your neighbor's like, "Hey, Andrea, how's it going?" You have a conversation with her. Next thing you know, this simple thing of, "Hey, can you take this 5 doors down and deliver it?"
mm,
Becomes it takes 8, 9, 10 hours because all these things popped up. And that's just me and you.
mm-hmm,
But when you're talking like an organization of 10 people, 15 people, 100 people, and all those little things happen, it basically grinds the progress it can grind the progress of the organization to a complete halt.
mm,
And so that's what friction is. Really, as leaders, that's what one of the things that I've learned, that you have to lead through that.
mm,
And sometimes it takes pushing, and then sometimes it takes coming up with adapting the plan on the fly to go around those obstacles. Maybe it's me coming to your house 10 minutes later, grabbing the card myself, and then walking it 5 doors down. Or I just send it the message I had asked you to walk 5 doors down. I send it in an email, so it gets there a lot faster. But that's probably one of the biggest things that happens all the time, just because our operational tempo, the amount of training that we do, or exercises that we do. There's so many of those
mm,
that it happens all the time. So you learn to prepare yourself for them, so you're not the person losing their minds when it starts happening.
Mm-hmm.
I've learned that if you start freaking out as a leader, your people will not only meet you where they're at, they'll usually escalate where you're at. So if you're at a 7, they may be at a 9 or a 10.
Yeah.
But by being that calm voice and very deliberately working through how to get to the other side of that moment of friction,
Mm.
that's probably something that I don't know. I
Yeah.
imagine that happens all the time in the civilian side too, right?
Sure, sure. But I think I mean, there's definitely a different flavor or experience that you're having, with there's so many different stakeholders, so many different cultures and things at stake that are so
Yeah,
big.
yeah, absolutely. So it's been something like it's every single day. It's always something that happens, and that you've got to lead through it. So I think you coming out on the other side of it, you learn to be a lot cooler, calmer
Yeah.
when everything's on fire around you.
And how do you help those who are next in command underneath of you, whatever, I'm not sure exactly how to say that, but how do you help those people to also be able to deal with the friction?
I think one is talking about it. I was talking with Steve Pressfield.
Mm-hmm.
He wrote The War of Art. He has a book out right now called The Daily Pressfield. The very first section of the book is about a force called resistance.
Mm-hmm.
And what Steve says, resistance is friction, but what Steve says resistance is anytime you're trying to do something better with your life, whether it's lose weight, whether it's, write a book or do some sort of creative endeavor, there's going to be an equal and opposite force pushing back against you, and that's resistance. And him and I were talking about it, and he started the book off. He's like, if you talk about resistance from the get-go, it starts reducing its power. And so whenever we do these field exercises, I let people know right off the bat, friction is going to attack us, and we've got to be ready for it. And it's going to be okay. It's part of it. No plan survives first contact. So that's the first thing. The second thing is when it does happen, like we were talking about a minute ago, is being cool, calm, collected, being the person who is calm when it happens. And when you see somebody starting to get worked up, pull them to the side and just say, "Hey, it's going to work out. It's going to be okay." Have I always gotten that right? Absolutely not. But it's definitely something that I've tried over time to get better at. And there's things like lack of sleep that affect that.
Oh, yeah.
Um, but it's definitely something that I've strived to do as a leader over the last couple of years.
It definitely helps when you have that physical buffer of sleep, of, those things that you just have to have in order to stay in that part of your brain.
So it goes back to journaling. So I told you that I
Yeah.
write down my sleep scores every day.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I can see when I'm starting to trend downwards.
Mm.
And once I mean, it's the science is when you're tired, your ability to self-regulate
Hmm.
is greatly degraded, right?
Yep.
And so I can see that, and I will even change my schedule around to incorporate that. So I'm not the bad guy, or I'm not super short with people. Again, I don't always get it right, but by journaling and looking at that in my notebook and checking my sleep scores, I can kind of judge. I've been doing this for a couple of years now,
Mm-hmm.
so now I can kind of judge when I know that I'm starting to approach that precipice of being the bad leader.
You know what? I think that is so wise, and to be proactive about it, to be aware, to be proactive, even when I recognize that this is probably where I'm at, like whatever reaction I'm having is probably to do more with the lack of sleep than it is anything else and how I'm really feeling. So
Yeah,
I
that's
need to
so
just not,
huge.
I need to be quiet right now. Like go take this into the other room instead of trying to have a argument with somebody.
And I think that level of awareness, at least for me, I think it comes through the practice of journaling.
Mm.
Is you start picking up on those trends over time,
Yep.
and you can actually pull yourself out of a situation instead of going headfirst into it, which I used to do all the time
Yeah.
when I was younger, and not realize it was lack of sleep that was contributing to it.
Yeah, totally. So you said you have 30 days. So I don't want to, like, I don't want to push you into thinking about stuff you're not ready to think about, but I'm kind of curious as you're thinking about the change of command and retirement and moving into civilian life, I assume. What are the things that you're kind of holding on to as like this is what it looks like for me to leave well, and then this is what it looks like for me to transition.
I think it's something that was in the back of my mind from day one,
Mm,
because I knew I was going to retire out of this job,
mm,
and so I wanted to get the culture of the organization to a place where I was super proud of it when it was time to go. And this truly feels like a walk-off home run for me,
mm.
because of
It's great.
where I'm at. Like I'm so happy. Like I haven't left anything on the field. I have no regrets. Like I've done everything I wanted to do,
Mm,
and I'm good to move on. And I recognize like it's time for me to move on, and I'm just getting excited now
mm.
about the next chapter.
What do you think the next chapter will entail?
Ed, so are you familiar with Joseph Campbell, The Hero's Journey?
Yep.
A huge fan of it, and I've been writing about it now for the last year and a half in my weekly Sunday email, and I just finished it up. But essentially, for those who aren't familiar with it, it starts out with the person doesn't realize they're a hero. They're so much stuck in life. They receive a call to adventure. They refuse the call at first. They then accept the call. They go through some trials, and then they enter the special world. So if you think about, Frodo leaving the Shire and, going towards the Mordor, you think about Harry Potter thinking he's just a normal boy, and then he ends up at Hogwarts. Every great story across every culture, across histories, is has an elements of the hero's journey in it. So you finally enter the special world. You face a lot of trials. You face a lot of setbacks. You have allies and mentors that help you along their way, and then eventually you come face to face with the villain of your story, and you slay the villain, and you get a prize, and you take that prize, and that prize is like the golden fleece. It's some sort of magic elixir to restore the kingdom. Think Luke Skywalker slaying Darth Vader, the Emperor, and then is able to save the galaxy, and then the hero returns home. And so I started studying this about 10 years ago, reading a lot of Joseph Campbell's works, studying other aspects of literature, starting studying Jungian psychology. And so in my own journey, I felt this call to write about 6, 7 years ago. And at the same time, I was doing really well professionally. Things were going really well. And I felt this like internal stress, this internal anxiety to go do something else, but I couldn't do that. Like I told you, I was anonymous as a writer. I didn't want anybody to know I was writing. But eventually, over time, I could trace my life over the last decade with the steps of the hero's journey. And I've discovered that the thing I want to do is write and help other people. So, in about 50 days, I'm returning home, and I've got this gift now, and I want to share it with other people. So I plan to do a lot more from the Green Notebook. I'm going to be helping some popular authors, which I won't talk about on this, researching their books,
Mm.
and just doing a lot more writing.
Mm.
I don't know how it's going to work out, Andrea. I don't know. All I know is it's going to work out.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you've got a great website and following already, so I'm sure that it'll work out.
Yeah, I hope so.
And you're very articulate, so you can speak. You can be a speaker.
Yeah, you never know. We'll see what
Oh no,
happens
you
6
know,
7 months
I
from now.
know. You'll be a speaker. This is
Yeah,
how this works.
I can't wait. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And maybe one of the things that you'll find is that as you kind of do some step back reflection on the big picture of what all you've done in the last few, maybe the last few years or whatever your career, but maybe that leadership philosophy or that like overarching theme that you maybe that'll start to become clear. And those, because you could talk about so many things, and I think that's one of the hard things when you're a learner and you see so many things, you can talk about so many different kinds of things. Like then the question becomes, well, what is the overarching thing? What is the real, like, the thing inside of you that really needs to come out and be the sort of the tip that leads to everything else? Anyway, that's I
Yeah, I love that. And I think the thing that's starting to emerge now, and
Hmm.
actually writing this hero journey series
Yeah.
really brought it out, is as I feel like a lot of people, they make decisions in their 20s, maybe late 20s, early 30s, about this is the career I want to take. I want to be a doctor. I want to be a lawyer. I want to be in the military. I want to do this thing for 20 years. And then I feel like they get stuck,
Mm.
especially in the military. It's very easy to get focused on climbing the organizational ladder because you get awards, you get promotions, you get a lot of accolades, you get a bigger office,
Yeah.
and people salute you.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people get stuck chasing that, and they never figure out the thing that makes them, what makes me me, and what makes you Andrea. And
Hmm.
so I really want to help people, and they get like their work, their professional identity
Hmm.
becomes their identity.
Hmm.
And I've seen it a lot of times in the military. I've seen it in professional athletes that I've interviewed. They feel lost when they have to leave that behind. And so I think
Oh yeah.
one of the things that I really want to do is help people figure out, like, what's the thing that makes you you,
Yeah.
and then be very confident in it and be proud of that, and then use that to do whatever it is that you want to do. I had a leader about 4 or 5 years ago make me sit down and write a why statement. And that was like really hard to do. But once I did it and it was helping others lead with the best version of themselves,
Mm-hmm.
I it like freed me up. Like I realized that I started realizing in that moment that it didn't matter what job I was doing, whether it was in the military or out of the military. Like I could still do that thing that was like my core purpose.
Yeah.
And that's what like I'm really excited about, because I get to do that on my own terms next, hopefully.
You know what? Yeah, that's exciting because I know that that's like losing that sense of purpose is often what, from what I hear, from people who have transitioned into civilian life from the military, like losing that sense of purpose tends to be the thing that can be most derailing and difficult. And so for you to have that, know that that can carry over into the next step is great.
Yeah, thanks. And again, going back to the concept of the hero's journey, when the hero discovers whatever that is, brings it back to their community with the
Yep.
purpose of helping other people. And so that's kind of going to be my North Star here in a few months.
Well, this has been a really fun conversation, Joe. I've got a couple more things. So, where can people find the Green Notebook
But it's actually from the Green Notebook,
from
when
the
not
Green?
.com, because I tried the Green Notebook at the time and that address was taken. So I was like, we'll just do from the Green. Anyways, so it's from the
Okay.
greennotebook.com. You can go there. We're on Instagram, we're on Twitter, we're on LinkedIn, and on Facebook. The podcast is available wherever people listen to your podcast. I think we are all on the same
Yep.
platforms. And then there's a couple newsletters we have. Can I share those too?
Sure.
Awesome. So we have a monthly reading list email that I've been doing since 2017. We got about 7,000 subscribers, and it's 3 to 4 books a month. Just like things I've read and why I think it's important for other leaders to read them. And then a weekly email, which is a Sunday morning reflection email that comes out every Sunday morning. And for the last year and a half, the theme was the hero's journey. Now it's back to just different topics I have interest I think are worthy of reflection on a Sunday morning.
Mm. Okay, well, we'll link to all that in the show notes. And my last question for you is this is the Voice of Influence podcast. So, what last piece of advice would you want to give somebody who would like to have a voice of influence?
Begin with the dictum that the ancient Greeks thought was so important to inscribe above the Temple of Delphi, which is know thyself.
Wow, that's very succinct. And I think it makes a lot of sense given everything else that we talked about today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Andrea. This is awesome, and I've actually been listening to your other episodes, and I've enjoyed your podcast and some of the guests you've had on, whether it was somebody who's a professional wrestler to a
Yeah.
ghostwriter. So I appreciate what you do.